When people say there isn't a cartoon that does this, or there haven't been enough of these cartoons, more likely than not, they couldn't be farther from the truth. There is quite literally a cartoon for everything, whether it's from 2019 or 1919. As harebrained as it seems, there's a reason why people call the new decade's worth of animated media derivative. Considering how far back the history of the medium spans, there's pretty much no topic left uncovered. And that's not a diss either, that's quite an accomplishment. There's so many cartoons worth looking at that get overlooked. Surprisingly, even if there is one worth a deep dive, oftentimes there might not be enough meat there to sustain a true review of it. So I wanted to start a series for cartoons like that, stuff that's worth talking about, but what might not sustain a modest discussion on their own. Each volume will contain 3 to 5 topics of discussion and review, and today we're going back into the archives to highlight 4 Nelvana cartoons from the late 90s. There's nothing special about them, there's no pattern, I just wanted to get to these shows eventually. Starting off with...
He's enormous, baby. Sometimes disastrous, man.
Neds Newt. Neds Newt is a disappointment and a half. Back when I didn't even do reviews, I was excited to check this one out sometime, and it looked like a hell of a time. Being one of Teletoon's 6 inaugural originals, it definitely seemed to have the right kind of energy to balance out and carry the rest of the lineup. I wasn't wrong about its energy, so to speak, but it's not the right kind of spunk I'd be expecting. The loose premise is about this kid named Ned who gets a pet newt and turns to a special kind of food to keep him energetic. The result is a 6-foot bipedal pop culture reference spouting shapeshifter affectionately called Newton. Anything past the setup changes every other episode, so any attempt at an explanation past that would not be completely accurate to the lunacy that is this thing that we must call a cartoon. Never have I seen an intro that sells you so fast and makes you want to get a refund just as quick. These scenes seem to be from a shorter pilot film based on the main 2 characters playing a game of hide and seek. Its animation is dynamic and snappy, and it looks great. Not to mention, it sells itself as a point of controlled chaos. Now, this show wants to knock your block off with a Looney Tunes-style romp. You don't know much of anything about these characters other than their names and a few loose settings, but their personalities are set to drive the tone. The main problem with this is that our leads don't really have personalities to carry things. Ned's an average kid with an average life and average reactions to things around him. He's not really even a straight man because he lacks a backbone. His pet Newt, despite being his polar opposite, is also fairly spineless. Alas, amidst the amazing barrage of pop culture references, he seemingly has lost the plot in each and every episode. This is a major problem with the show, just constant noise and a lack of cohesion between what we would loosely call story beats here and there. Most of the episodes don't even have a typical structure, they follow more in the way of Winnie the Pooh vignettes than anything, except not as entertaining. Usually, catalyst for action on Ned's end is triggered, and usually while there is something launching us from point A, we usually don't get what would be proposed as point B. The episode just chugs forward with the power of endless referential humor, and along the way, the episode ends. I can kind of understand where this was aiming to be. As much as I hate rogue rip-off comparisons, I'd be lying if I didn't detect at least a hint of suspected influence from Robin Williams' Genie. I don't necessarily blame whoever may have led that change. The shtick is a palatable routine, even though the energy and mannerisms for said character were clearly modeled for and around him, but it just really falls flat in practice here. Shame, too, because as funny as I hear he still is now, Harlan Williams was at his peak back in the day. A role like this could have popped off for everybody. The show, unfortunately, doesn't give us much compelling to make that happen. Many of the characters are flat, the plots go nowhere, the incessant references make everything worse. I do get the somewhat quirky vibe they seem to be going for, but point blank, this just ain't it. While similarly not heavy hit, I would think such a tonal pitch was handled much better in...
Yeah, anything is possible. We're flying Rhino Junior High. Yeah,
Flying Rhino Junior High. Flying Rhino Junior High is unexpectedly pretty fun, and while not perhaps the greatest underrated hit of this outfit, it could perhaps draw a few new fans into the fray. As explained in the theme song, Flying Rhino is a mysterious place full of endless possibilities. These are mostly masterminds by some genius turned NEAT known as the Phantom, living in the school's basement with his loyal minion, Raticus. There's a group of kids that they usually target through the use of dangerous and complex situations, and no matter the objective, they gotta get through it all. Perhaps jumping off directly from the previous entry, this one serves as a milquetoast but overall pretty engaging show. The main driving characters, save for the Phantom, aren't particularly interesting. Billy, Ruby, Marcus, and Lydia barely break out of their given archetypes. They're not terribly obnoxious, just one note. Luckily, they're entertaining enough to make a journey through a simulation a literal trip. Each setting is a vague set of characters and circumstances that is jazzed up by the Phantom and Raticus' running commentary. Somehow, that's enough. It's not really about the end goal, but the road trip made to accomplish it. It's fun, but there's not much else to it besides that. The character design is unremarkable. Why, 2 of the 4 main kids are walking, talking pyramids, and why almost everyone supports a round clown nose is not explained to me, and it gives it a bit of a generic look. It's not too bad. The better work comes out in the minion designs, if anything. A lot of elements feel like they've got the spark of something crazy different, but they never take it forward fully. Luckily, it doesn't harm the show too much, but I wonder how I'd see it if it was remembered more fondly, or more memorable on the whole. If it were something like George and Martha. George and Martha is the obligatory adaptation of this outfit based on the 70s and 80s books penned by James Marshall. The series is just about titular characters being friends and having mundane, made madcap adventures around town. It's your typical X and Y buddy comedy, but with a bit more teeth. George and Martha, as a series, has a really good sense of how to keep the action going. The episodes I saw really just kept everything rolling along. These aren't even really theatrical level sequences. They don't have any crazy tracking shots or lens angles. There's just a sense of momentum throughout, especially for these characters. I did read a few of the books back in the day, but as I thought I remembered, I figured the title characters were just an older married couple. Within the first minute of the episode, I was already proven wrong. These 2 are extreme. This is relatively minor, but I do like how closely they were able to stick to the book's design. Nowadays, a lot of adaptations are put through that heavily puppet-rigged pipeline to maintain all the stylistic touches. Granted, this one has a far more simple style to wrangle than something like Jacob Tutu or Stella and Sam. But everything from the line weight to the washed-out color palette is damn near perfect. I also really dig the musical selection they have going. It's pretty multifaceted, but it has a consistent flavor to it. It's one of those clever shows for little ones that can take a mundane pitch and craft a big adventure out of it. It's a great sell to these characters. It's the best thing you could have from having 2 A-list comic geniuses as the title characters. They gave this a Looney Tunes type flair while remaining consistent with the graceful calm of Nelvana properties like Little Bear. It's a great time, but nothing can truly escape the utter majesty that is.
Dig around, there's a whole world to explore. Sights and sounds, you never seen or heard before. Sing it loud.
Sticking Around. Stickin' Around is often considered the creme de la creme of old-school underrated Canadian cartoons, and its reputation from an objective technical standpoint is pretty well-deserved. The series follows 2 kids, Stacy and Bradley, on what is described as hand-drawn adventures in their zany, scribble-infested world. It's another one of those fantastical slice-of-life shows, but the life this series takes on is one that is truly a ride. They can imagine some truly wild premises here. The writing is fairly clever too. The dialogue is pretty nuanced, but it's also pretty tight. Despite its detours in dark comedy, it almost never breaks from the imaginative bits. They directly affect the timeline of the story and don't put themselves on pause to show you what happened in the real world. People often give it props for feeling really authentic and diving deep into the mind of a child imagining their way through a tough situation. Not in every obnoxious way, either. There's a degree of separation where you're aware this isn't exactly a kid's stream of consciousness, but it's also not revealing itself to be patronizing, either. All the kid characters are actually voiced by kids and teens, which definitely does add to the charm a bit more. It's a weird feeling knowing some of these kids just hopped off the magic school bus to get to the recording studio.
What?
Yeah, this was Arnold. This was actually him.
Yo!
Speaking of characters, these guys are great. Even with this underlining film of cynicism coating the dialogue, there's a lot of comedic diversity to it. Sometimes you gotta deal with corny characters like Dale, the kid with no inside voice.
Hey! Somebody's stealing your car, okay?
I feel like I've seen him from somewhere before. Other times you gotta deal with kids like Polly, an insightful, intelligent preschool-age girl that carries her dead dog around with her on every adventure, and insists that it's still alive. Stickin' Around is really trying to make a case for kids' mental health by traumatizing the audience. I guess it's about awareness. So basically, it just capitalizes on the quirks of the characters, but you don't always know what you're up for when you check out each episode. The main two kids, Stacy and Bradley, are the evident driving force behind the show and the aesthetic. These are largely facets of their imagination, after all, and it shows accordingly. I noticed early on they had tangents and really long, drawling sequences where they just bounce ideas off each other. These two fight like cats and dogs, but group back together in the end like real friends. Doesn't excuse their more outrageous moments, though. Arguably, this series' most prominent trademark would be its extra scribbly, out-of-bounds, outlined, kooky-colored boiling animation. It was implemented to tie back into the theme of being invented inside the roving mind of a child. In Season 1, both the outline and the colors jittered like crazy on a lot of the characters, but by Season 3 they let the line art lie idle, and only the filled colors would boil out of bounds, albeit in a more subdued fashion. It's a great tool that doesn't wear on the eyes or get old in any given storyline, which is a pretty precise summation of Stickin' Around as a cartoon. Overall, in terms of diverse premises, Nelvana really came to its own into the 90s. In the early days, it had to shamble up from original concepts, and in the 80s, they got their dues for a few slam dunk adaptations. But in the 90s, they were allowed to do basically anything. Everything they could have wanted. But in the 90s, they were allowed to do anything. Everything they could have wanted. It was great to grow up in that era that fostered that kind of development. They still maintain this diversity today, but it definitely doesn't have the same feeling. So it's cool to explore more of their history back at their peak.